Right, would you ask Mr. Lawrence to come back, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Lawrence. All right to carry on?
Yes.
Yes.
Good, thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lawrence, can I go back to an email run I wanted to show you before the break, for which I've managed now to find the reference. It's RYD 3011573, which is an email chain, this time from August 2014. And I'd like you to go to it's page 2 of that email run. Still the right one. Yeah, and it's the one we looked at before the short adjournment. And you received this, although I can't show you the email chain in which you did. If you go to page 3, perhaps we can see a little bit more of this email. This is Janice Ray, 8th of July 2014 to Claire Williams. Please see message below. I'm sorry, I'm taking this in reverse order so you can see what comes, which I've just received from an LFB inspection officer who's received an email from Eddie Defan. Do we need to write to residents on the issue of fire safety during the works? We could put something together to reassure them that there is still a stay-put strategy and reiterating the procedures they should follow, works in hand to advance fire safety in the longer term, etc. Perhaps this has already been done. I need to respond to this man and would like to be able to emphasise what we've already done, meetings, letters, etc. Please advise. Now, what Janice Ray gets is from Ben Dewis of the London Fire Brigade, and we see that at the very bottom of page 3, top of page 4. Dear Janice, can we just flick over to that? And he says, Dear Janice, I received this email below from an Edward Defan, who you may be aware of, who lives at Grenfell Tower. Dear Ben, please be advised that residents of Grenfell Tower are very concerned about fire safety after the recent closure of all land and rights of way to the west and north of Grenfell Tower. We're also very concerned that we have no idea where to assemble should there be a fire in Grenfell Tower, as there is no open space in the vicinity that is available to our community. Please can you help ensure that the Fire Brigade will monitor the current changes on Lancaster West Estate that impact on our fire safety, and could you also inform us where we should assemble in the event of a fire? Thank you for your assistance with this matter. Kind regards, Edward Defan, Grenfell Action Group. And he goes on, the contractor has contacted the local station to inform them of changes to access points and riser access. This is Mr. Dewis now. The local station are making arrangements to carry out a familiarisation visit for local crews. Unfortunately, it would appear the same courtesy has not been given to the residents to update them on their emergency procedures. Could I ask what the measures being taken in regard to fire safety at the premises are during the refurbishment works? I've read that all to you, Mr. Lawrence, because if one skips back up the email chain we've looked at before, we don't see it coming to you. We do have an email which we haven't disclosed, which shows that there is this comes to you. So take it from me that this does come to you in copy form or in forwarding form. My question is, do you remember seeing this email and this issue raised by Mr. Defan and being discussed within the TMO?
I don't specifically remember Mr. Defan raising concern this. I do remember Simon O'Connor doing exactly what said here, contacting the local station and them sending out 3 or 4 watches, whatever they had or whatever they have over a period of days, weeks, to come and inspect the site and understand how they could access the building. And I remember also there being notices from the TMO regarding the stay put.
Right. Prior to this time, so this is July 2014, can you tell us what consideration Rydon had given to informing residents about emergency procedures during the refurbishment?
Well, the emergency procedures at that stage, I'm not sure we'd even started we were doing some enabling works with in the TMO office and other buildings. I'm not sure if we'd actually started on site per se and changed anything that they were already doing and the way they were already managing the building. So.
And do you remember whether you took any action in response to the concern raised by Mr. Dewis, passing on in turn Mr. Defan's concerns?
Well, we had the fire brigade, like I say, we had the fire brigade did their part and they came down and inspected. I think there's correspondence now, whether that be way of a newsletter or a posters put up by the TMO, but there was correspondence with the residents at the time. I think that was TMO led actually, but.
Now, can I ask you to look at a document from the next year, 2015? This is TMO 0085287, please. It's TMO 0085287. Right, that's another false reference. Do you remember, from your own recollection, going to a meeting in the July of 2015 with Peter Madison and Grenfell Tower residents relating to the residents' concern with the refurbishment process?
I remember there being a meeting, whether it was that time or not, but yes, I do remember being a meeting, yes.
Yes. I was going to ask you questions from a document, but I think I can do it without. Before that meeting, do you know what process was in place for residents to raise complaints about fire safety in respect of the refurbishment?
Well, the process we set out previously, they had they could contact us via our resident liaison officers. They could also contact their housing officers, which were in a nearby building. Yes.
Can I ask you then to look at the document, which is TMO 00852871? And this is the document I wanted to show you a minute ago. It just puts it in time, and it's a letter to the residents. And if we can just look at page 2, we can see the end of the letter. And we can see who it comes from. It comes from Councillors Robert Atkinson and Judith Blakeman from the Nottingdale ward. I just wanted to look at page 2 with you, individual matters and complaints. Can you see at the top of that page? The TMO stressed the need to discuss the detailed implications of how the works can be carried out in each flat individually with residents, owing to the different circumstances in each flat. Refusing to allow them in is not helpful. Residents made strong points about the TMO and Rydon giving conflicting information and misleading different householders. They objected to being picked off individually. Some Rydon workers were being very aggressive and threatening towards them. Pausing there, do you remember the complaints of this nature arising from residents saying that TMO and Rydon were giving conflicting information?
I don't remember that specifically. No.
Have you seen this document?
It's not one that I recall, but...
Right. Can you help us with the objection to being picked off individually? Did Rydon have a process of picking off individual residents and dealing with them? What about the TMO? Did they?
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
Right. So, some Rydon workers were being very aggressive and threatening towards them. Now, we saw something of this in one of the earlier documents today. Clearly, this was a concern serious enough for Grenfell residents to raise with these two councillors, and they thought it was serious enough to raise formally. Was this matter addressed with you yourself at the time?
I don't remember.
You don't remember? Do you remember nothing at all about complaints that Rydon's workers were being very aggressive and threatening towards residents?
Not specifically, no.
In general terms?
No. No, not really, no.
All right. Complaints. Although Rydon are available to receive complaints, the TMO is not, and it is difficult. Sorry, is not, and it is difficult to raise issues with them. Pausing there, do you remember yourself somebody complaining to you that the TMO was not available to receive complaints?
No, but then I wouldn't be the first point of call for Rydon, so...
Right. And then it goes on, the TMO out-of-hours service is a disaster. Residents have reported on many occasions when lifts are not working without response. When the water was turned off, no water bottles or other arrangement was offered to affect households. There is a need for both the TMO and Rydon to treat residents with proper respect, engage with them properly and apologise when an apology is justified. Mr Madison said he was at the meeting to apologise on behalf of the TMO when services are not working or things go wrong. Do you remember anyone raising with you or you becoming aware of any need for Rydon to treat residents with proper respect and engage with them properly and apologise when an apology is justified? Does that ring a bell with you?
It doesn't ring any particular bell, no. But I would expect Rydon to be treating residents with respect.
Did you carry a record, did Rydon, that is, carry a record of concerns raised by individual residents?
I think we covered this earlier in the RLOs.
It's the RLOs.
The RLOs. The RLOs are the first point of
Yeah.
contact. Like I said, they're effectively the customer service on behalf of the work.
And just in the context of this document, can you help us as to whether there was a system whereby any complaint that was made to Rydon was shared with the TMO?
Well, there was meetings between the housing officers, regular meetings through the housing officers and the RLOs. So I would imagine it was shared there.
Right.
Simon O'Connor may be able to assist with that.
Can you assist?
I can't because I don't think I attended any of them.
Did you ever see any records of those meetings?
I don't recall, but there may be minutes.
Right. Would you have had occasion to see them?
Again, unless there was a matter that couldn't be dealt with by Simon and the team on site, then no, it would be by exception.
Right. Did you recall seeing a record of any specific fire safety complaints made by residents at this time or before, or after?
No, the only thing that I recollect was there was a comment about because we had to reconfigure the access point or entry and access points to the building during the construction, and there was an issue brought to us about the lifts going down to ground in the case of emergency. So I believe we dealt with that. I can't believe how we dealt with that, but I believe we dealt with that at the time. That's all I can remember, really.
Do you remember whether any action was taken in response to the matters that were raised at the meeting of the 11th of July?
I don't really remember them, but I'm sure there'll be a record somewhere.
Right. Can I then go back to an issue I canvassed with you before the break about DDAs? You remember seeing the
Yes.
minutes which referred to the potential engagement of a DDA advisor. What input, I know you didn't engage one, but what input would a DDA expert have onto the plans of the lower floors?
If there was any need for DDA compliant, if the TMO had a particular resident they had in mind going there that needed any special measures installed, they could help advise on that.
Right. Would it therefore have been normal for a DDA advisor to comment on and make recommendations as to access and egress for wheelchair users?
I'd never used a DDA consultant previously, so I can't really comment.
Well, right. So therefore, you couldn't help me with whether they would make recommendations about how to cater for residents with limited mobility or with impaired vision, matters of that nature, which might impede their escape in the event of a fire.
I would assume so, but I've never used them before, so I don't know.
I see. Did the TMO give you any detailed information that any of the flats would be used or occupied by residents with mobility issues or vision difficulties or matters of that nature which would impede the escape in the event of a fire?
I think at the time of me leaving the project, I don't think anybody was aware which particular residents, or if they'd even be chosen, who was going to go into what flat. I don't know.
Did you ever, at the time, have enough information about the, I was going to say the profile of the residents in the building, but their specific mobility issues or vision issues or matters of that nature personal to them, which would enable you to make a decision as to whether you should retain a DDA expert to assist you?
Well, the only information we'd have got was what the RLOs had. So,
we discussed the question of rebel residents earlier on, an expression I think you used in one of your emails, and you referred to a small group of vocal residents, and you named one, Mr. Defan. Can I ask you, were the residents of flat 122 people who you would have regarded as vocal or rebel?
I don't know who that is.
Right. Had Miss Williams told you anything about the Grenfell Tower Leaseholders Association and the residents associated with it?
I think we knew there were, well, not I think, we knew there were leaseholders in the building. I couldn't tell you how many, but yes, we knew there were leaseholders involved in the building, yes.
Did Miss Williams tell you anything about them, about their attitude, about the position that they took as a group?
I don't recall anything specific.
I'm going to ask you some questions now about plasterboard, a slightly different topic. We discussed it earlier on, I think, in the context of a substitution. Are you aware about the combustibility or limited combustibility characteristics of plasterboard, Mr. Lawrence?
I would say it would be good, and it's used for fire rating walls and ceilings, and so yes.
Yes, well, you would be right about that. Were you familiar with ADB 2 Part 9 or Section 9.13, which says in terms that cavity barriers in a stud wall or partition or provided around openings, those are the critical words, may be formed of cement-based or gypsum-based boards, at least 12 millimetres thick. Were you familiar with that as a principle?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Well, yes. The cavity barriers in a stud wall or partition, or provided around openings, may be formed of cement-based or gypsum-based boards. Were you familiar with that?
Yeah, mate. Doing partition is generally, yes, you would.
All right. Did anybody within Rydon or the contractor chain or the wider refurbishment team discuss the possible additional benefit to fire protection of adding a layer of plasterboard?
To where in specific?
Well, around the windows. Let's start with that.
Not from a fire point of view, no.
Right. Anywhere else?
No.
No. Is there any reason why you didn't insist on using plasterboard and let SD plastering revert to using UPVC trims backed straight onto combustible insulation?
No.
There's no. So you didn't say to SD plastering, well, actually, we should use plasterboard because it's less combustible than UPVC. Let's go with that. You didn't.
No, I don't think we were aware of the at the time of the regulations around that. We were looking at a purely aesthetic trim to the inside of a window.
Was there any stage in the refurbishment process that you examined yourself or with others the question of fire safety at the conjunction of materials being used? So, for example, the conjunction of the UPVC reveal with what was behind it?
No, but I would expect any cavity barriers to be dealt with as part of the external envelope and within the cavity. I saw them as two separate items.
I just want to ask you a question about dry risers. A short question, I think. Can you please go to paragraph 62 of your witness statement, page 13? And you are talking there about the communal fire detection system and modifications made to the dry riser. You see that?
Yes.
And you say these modifications were minor and included small changes to the lower floor areas. I understand that J.S. Wright sought clarification from building control, Paul Hanson, about whether the systems needed to be upgraded in line with current building regulations. Paul Hanson confirmed that as the height of the existing riser was not being increased, building regulations did not require the risers to be brought in line with current requirements. Can I ask you then to look at a document, JSW 402538. Now, this is an email from Paul Hanson to David Bradbury on the 3rd of September 2014, copied to you. You see that?
Yes.
Hi, David, thank you for your email. And then he says, I note, we are not increasing the height of the existing riser, but we are adding 2 additional floors at low level, which were previously walkways. We understand the existing riser is above the current permitted height of 50 metres. We would therefore need to discuss the proposed modification and what measures we need to take to gain approval for the new system. And then Paul Hanson says, this sounds like a matter of control rather than a technical question. I've spoken to John Hoban, the area surveyor, who would normally deal with matters on control, and he agreed in this instance with my sending you this response. Essentially, the building regulations cannot require you to improve the system to serve the existing floors over 50 metres. The regulations only apply to the work being carried out, and additionally, you must not adversely affect the existing building. If this does not answer the question, please give me a ring to discuss further. Do you recall receiving this email?
I recall the subject. Not specifically this email, but the subject,
right.
Yes.
Did you have any understanding about what Mr. Hanson meant when he said that essentially the building regulations cannot require you to improve the system to serve the existing floors over 50 metres, and that they only apply to the work being carried out, etc.? Did you understand what he meant by that?
Well, I think he's saying as the height's not being increased, we can't enforce that they are upgraded to meet current regs.
Yes. And what about what about when he says cannot require you to improve the system to serve the existing floors over 50 metres? What did you understand by what he was getting at there?
I think exactly what he's saying, really. You can't. Yeah, building regs, you don't need to improve the system and bring them up to current regulations.
Do you know what steps, if any, Rydon took or its contractors took to prevent the building from being adversely affected by alterations to the dry riser?
I think that's probably a technical question for J.S. Wright, I would have thought, and specialist.
Do you know? Can you help us with it?
No, I don't know.
Right. Now, in your statement, you've summarised the advice, I think I showed you, as the building regulations did not require the risers to be brought in line with the current requirements. Do you agree with that summary doesn't accurately reflect the email correspondence, at least as we see here?
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Is there there's no further emails relating to that, I'm assuming?
Now, I'm going to go to another topic, which is quality control generally at Rydon. Can I ask you to turn, please, first to ART 403762. This is a minute of a progress meeting, number 9, 17th of March 2015. You were present, as was Claire Williams and David Gibson from the TMO. And we could see from point 1.1, Neil Reed introduces himself to everyone as he will now be taking over the project from Philip Booth. That's within Artelia. And if we go to page 4 of the minute, let's look at item 11.13 together, please, at the bottom under AOB. And we can see there, Clerk of Works, NR noted that from reading the latest report dated 2nd of March 2015, there appeared to be the opportunity to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the quality inspection controls and processes in place. You see that? Do you recall that suggestion?
I do. I recall the subject. Now we're looking at it. Yes.
Do you know what prompted Mr. Reid to make that remark?
I think the Clerk of Works probably more the building side of Clerk of Works rather than the mechanical and electrical side of the Clerk of Works were, I think, turning up on more of an ad hoc basis, and it's best to get it in line with them not only seeing works as they're progressing but also seeing works ready for them to inspect.
If we look at ART 406641, please. 6641, and page 2 in that document, and look at the bottom of page 2 there, we will find an email from Matt Smith of Max Fordham of the 17th of March 2015 to Claire Williams. You see that? Copy to Mr. Reid and to Mr. Campbell at Max Fordham. Not copy to you, but I just want to ask you about it. And it concerns the provision for disabled access for accommodation. And it says, afternoon, Claire, we've been around the houses with this a bit already, but there appears to be some confusion with JS Wright / Rydon, so would you be able to explicitly state which flats the TMA requires to be lifetime homes compliant, whether these flats are to be fully compliant, i.e. mid-level TRVs, consumer unit, etc., which flats is disabled access and what requirements the TMO has for it, LST radiators, etc. Now, you go up the page to the top of page 2, we can see Ms. Williams' response. It actually starts at the bottom of the previous page. Matt, I think if Rydon do not know what is in the contract, they should raise as an RFI so there can be a formal response within a time frame. This is the easiest way of dealing with it. These issues that come up informally is they seem to be on the increase. You see that? In your role as contracts manager, were you aware that the TMO, your client at this time, thought that Rydon might not understand its contractual obligations?
No, I wasn't aware of that, no.
Because she's clearly saying if Rydon don't know what's in the contract, they should raise an RFI. Does that come as a surprise to you, or would that come as a surprise to you, to be told that Claire Williams thought that Rydon might not know what was in the contract?
Yes. I don't think it was raised with us. But
if you look at page 1, we can see a response from Neil Reid, and he writes to Claire Williams and Max Fordham, and he copies this to Nick Valente at Artelia, as well as Mr. Campbell at Max Fordham, and he says, supported. I've already asked for an IRS from Rydon in this week's progress meeting, and a separate meeting is being arranged for next week to explore this and the status on other information and decisions that are required for this project. Do you remember that? Do you remember this issue being raised in a progress meeting at that time?
I don't remember it specifically, but yes, I'll...
Right. He then goes on, Matt, I appreciate, he says, we haven't spoken yet, but looking forward to working with you and introducing some improved discipline by Rydon to the resolution of queries, decisions, etc. What lack of discipline do you think he might have been referring to at that time?
I don't know. I think you may have to ask Neil that. I don't know.
Do you accept that it was your responsibility to maintain the discipline in relation to the resolution of queries and decisions?
Yeah, it was the teams, yes.
So if there had been discipline that had required improving in those areas by Rydon, that would have been your responsibility?
Overall, yes, but it would depend on what discipline, and the team would be involved in that as well.
No, indeed. But in terms of responsibilities within Rydon, if there had been a lack of discipline in relation to decisions and queries, that would have been at your door. Yes?
Can you clarify what is meant by that? Because
I'm asking the question in general terms.
Yes,
There is an issue, and this issue is one for you.
yes.
Yes. Thank you. Now, let's look at ART 406629. This is an email from Neil Reed of Artelia to Claire Williams. This is the 9th of April 2015. If we look at it together, this is also copied to Nick Valente and Simon Cash within Artelia. Again, you don't see this, and that's why I'll show it to you in full and then ask you some questions about it. He says, thanks for your email of yesterday suggesting a meeting to discuss Artelia's fee account. I would agree we should meet. And then he goes on to say, I would like to propose a broader meeting objective and agenda for the following reasons. With my limited involvement to date, I hold a perception, and it's underlined, that 1, the scope of the work that Rydon is doing is not as well understood as it could be. There is significant email traffic of what is considered to be in the contract. 2, the roles and responsibilities of all parties do not appear as clear to me as they could be. Processes for resident liaison, COW, that's Clerk of Works, scope, architectural compliance, monitoring, for example. 3, new risks and issues are arising that need managing, mitigating, and for which financial provision is required in terms of build cost and consultant fee implications. What I would like to propose is a meeting on Monday the 20th, 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. at our Holborn office. Meeting objective, to review the contract documents and scope of works. Desired outcome, clarity on what is and is not included in the contract and the implications arising. This would include Chuichin Lim and Simon from Rydon. Both are available should you agree. Did anybody at this time, and we're looking at September 2015, raise with you the problem that Mr. Reed had identified in paragraph 1 there?
Not specifically, so I'm not sure which areas he is referring to. I'm not sure when Neil came, or we just seen it. I'm not sure when Neil came to take over from Philip Booth. So there was obviously a period of catching up as well. And I do recall we went to a meeting, but I couldn't tell you the content of that.
You did go to a meeting to discuss these things, did you?
I believe so. Yes, there was a
Right.
meeting. Yeah.
Did you come to learn why Mr. Reed had the perception that he did, as expressed in paragraph 1 there?
I don't recall.
What about issue 2? He says the roles and responsibilities of all parties did not appear as clear to me as they could be. Did Mr. Reed raise that with you at this meeting or at any other time?
I don't recall what was in the meeting. I just remember going to a meeting.
Do you know whether there's a note of this meeting?
No, I don't know.
Right.
It would have, if anything, I would have thought it'd be minuted by Artelia.
Okay. Is it fair to say that the party responsible for architectural compliance wasn't well understood?
No, I think we understood the compliance. So without having more specific information from Neil, I can't comment really.
Do you agree with his perception at the time that the processes for resident liaison were not well understood?
No.
Or were not clear?
No, but I don't know what part he's talking about. It's not clear if he's got a specific part or whether he's talking in general.
No, it's an impression he's giving, clearly, and I'm just wondering whether or not you could explain why he had that impression.
No.
And what about lack of clarity about COW scope? Can you explain why he had that impression?
COW was client, appointed by the client, so that's something for the TMO. So no, I don't know.
Right, and do I take it similarly in relation to architectural compliance, monitoring? You don't know why Mr. Reed had that impression?
No.
Right. Can I then ask you to go to an email, ART406657, which is an email of the 21st of April 2015, sent by Mr. Valente of Artelia to Claire Williams, and this one is copied to you and to Mr. Reed, as we can see. And this is after the meeting which you see had been arranged and you told us a minute ago you attended. It says, thank you for coming to the meeting last Friday. Please see below a record of the key actions / salient points. Meeting objective to review the contract, documents and scope of works. Desired outcome, clarity on what is and is not included in the contract and the implications arising. And then we see a long list over this page and the next, lift, AOV, Windows, HIU, and then it goes over onto page 2, please, if we can. We can see the rest of the list. Cyclical decorations and external work. See that?
Yes.
Does that email, and I know I've taken you through it pretty quickly, but does it reflect in general at least your recollection of what was discussed at that meeting?
I recall going. I don't recall what the discussions were, but I would say that would that probably is a fair reflection. Yes.
Yes, I mean, take time to look at it if you like.
I mean,
but
there'd be no reason for me to think otherwise.
And do you accept that as contracts manager for this project, it was your job to understand exactly these things and be able to answer questions about them?
Answer questions about them now. Some 5 years
at the
later,
time, at the meeting.
Yes.
Did it surprise you that you were being asked to go to a meeting to discuss with Artelia a review of the contract documents to give or assist in obtaining clarity on what is and is not included in the contract?
No, I think there probably was elements that needed clarifying between us and the TMO, and to understand what the TMO wanted, didn't want, etc. So no.
Do you know why it was necessary, or Neil Reid thought it was necessary, for him to take this step to organise such a meeting over a year after Rydon was first appointed, or at least told it had got the contract, in mid-March 2014?
Well, I think you probably best ask Neil, but Neil, in my experience, is a very good and very organised client PM, so he obviously felt that was the best way to approach and deal with the matters.
Were you asked to take any steps after this meeting?
Depending what's in the meeting notes, if there's any items for me to do.
Yes, that's a fair answer. Let me put the question a slightly different way. You could see the meeting objective and the desired outcome. As a result of this meeting, do you recall any particular steps that you were asked to take in order to further the outcome desired?
Not any particular steps, but I'll have to go through that.
Right. Now, I want to turn to a different topic, and we're coming quite close to the end now, just so you know where we are. And the topic is responsiveness and management and control. Can I ask you to look at RYD 3089082? This is an email to you at the bottom of that page, RYD 3089082, from Neil Reid, dated the 22nd of May 2015, and it's copied to Claire Williams and others within Artelia. Simon, following the progress meeting on Tuesday the 19th of May, I set out below our frustrations with regard to Rydon's current performance on this project, with specific reference to cost/commercial matters. And then he goes on to set out 3 issues below: the apparent lack of QS input, lack of response to queries or inquiries around new or additional work, and progress meetings and valuations. You see that?
Yes.
All these issues that he identifies were within your remit, weren't they?
As looking at the project overall, yes, but I don't manage the financial team. But I'd say the queries would have been passed to the financial team and probably Steve.
Yes. At the time he expressed those issues, did you consider them to be justified or unjustified?
I don't really recall, but if they're obviously raising, I wouldn't expect Neil to raise concern if there wasn't justification, but I don't recall them specifically.
It's quite a serious email, this, isn't it, to get from from the person carrying out the role of QS or CDM coordinator at this stage, setting out frustrations with regard to current performance on the part of Rydon, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think Neil was the CDM coordinator. I think Neil was the client's project manager. But
All right, whatever role he particularly had, it comes from Artelia.
they're asking for up-to-date financial information. Is how I read that.
Well, he was
They
setting
want-
out his
want
frustrations
quick.
with regard to Rydon's current performance, and I'm putting to you that would be a serious email. You take that seriously.
Would take that seriously, and it says with specific reference to cost and commercial matters.
It specifically, yes, and then we have the 3 items we've been through. Did you take it seriously?
Yes, and I would have passed it on to probably Zach Maynard as the managing surveyor, and Steve, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, we can see, and to be fair to you, I haven't focused your attention on the emails towards the top of the page. That is what you did.
Right.
Same day. You can see you passed it to Zach Maynard, copied to Steve Blake, and Zach Maynard sent it to Adam Marriott. So it went up and across Rydon. Did you yourself put your hands on these problems and seek to get to the bottom of them within Rydon, rather than simply passing them on to Zach Maynard and Steve Blake?
I think by passing them on to the appropriate people that had, Zach's a managing surveyor, so he's in control of the QS and the commercial team, and Steve Blake is my director. I think that is dealing with it. And
So you told us in answer to a question I asked not very long ago that these 3 areas fell within your remit. So if they fell within your remit, can you explain why you did no more than passing them on to the people who you thought were the appropriate people to deal with them?
because I would need so I'm passing them up the chain to a director, and I'm passing them across to a managing surveyor.
What did
So
you
I
yourself
can't-
do?
I can't-
Sorry.
Pass them across to those people when we probably had a conversation about it, but I don't recall.
Right. He continues at the bottom of page 1. The project is reaching a critical point where the scope of works required needs clarity and issues need resolving. Some of these require proactive effort on the part of Rydon to define, and he gives you a list, what was priced, what the price assumed or was based on, what the reality is on site, what this means for the price, how Rydon can ensure the scope of work required can be provided while remaining within the agreed price. And he gives an example about a radiator. Now, all of those items in that list, were they covered by your one of the things that you were doing, which was managing the financial risks of the project by recognising and reporting the implications of any changes occurring during the contract?
But I had overall, I was there to deliver the contract overall, but obviously I needed assistance by the different departments, and I would need to default to the managers and the senior managers of those departments to assist me.
Yes. Did you follow up with them about what they were going to do in response to these complaints?
I would imagine we had a conversation. We had a weekly team meeting at the head office, so it was probably discussed then, but I don't recall.
Right. So you don't recall pursuing to satisfactory solution, to your own satisfaction, how these complaints were eventually dealt with within Rydon?
I don't recall how they were dealt with, no.
Does that not rather tell us that, in fact, you didn't have your hands on the tiller in respect at least of these 3 areas and the list provided by Mr. Reid?
I think if we have a meeting, and we have an internal meeting, a weekly internal meeting update, and I've got a managing surveyor and I've got a director who's senior to me in the meeting, and have raised these points, I just don't know what the outcome was from that. I don't recall.
Looking at the next paragraph, first main one on page 2, he says, we would ask that Rydon step up their efforts to ensure that the team can respond to the needs of the project, provide the complete D&B service as required by our client, and fundamentally provide proactive help and support in providing the information that is key to the client's ability to make decisions. Now, that is, well, let me put it this way. When you read that, were you, putting it neutrally, surprised that this very serious criticism was being made by Mr. Reid?
Well, I didn't feel we were I think this is insinuating that the way it's being read and analysed now is insinuating that the whole project's falling apart, etc., and I don't think that is the case. But I think you probably will need to ask Neil that. I think it's brought about by. It appears to be brought about by changes and some elements that need to be clarified between us and the client, and for the reactiveness of us to respond to changes, particularly when it comes to commercial aspects, needs to be improved. I think that's the sum of it.
Right. Did you understand what Mr. Reid meant by the complete D&B service as required by our client?
In that context, no.
Did you ask him to clarify it?
I don't recall.
And he goes on. Currently, issues are being raised effectively, but they are not being concluded efficiently. Changes require your cost input, robust cost information and options are required, and dialogue is necessary with the client, our QS, and with the client's design representatives. These are the prerequisites necessary for the client to make well-informed and objective decisions that in turn enable Rydon to progress the works diligently. Currently, there is a fear that works could fall into delay because the client has not made decisions and issued requisite instructions. The reality is that the client cannot make decisions without the cost information from Rydon, as the overall spend needs to be constrained within budget. And then he says, in the fourth paragraph from bottom, the next paragraph, I would be obliged if you could acknowledge this email and confirm Rydon's plans for resolving this problem at the earliest opportunity. And I'm going to come back to that. Can I first take you outside this document to an email at ART 406711, please, which is the email from her to Neil Reid of the 2nd of June 2015. And she, in the second email down on that page, says to him, subject Grenfell, Neil, it was an interesting meeting this morning and picked up many issues. I think since you started, many issues have now been raised and require your urgent attention. There are still ongoing issues with the costs and getting quality information in a timely way from Rydon, which mean we may need to look at any areas of savings so that we keep within budget. I'd like to organise a sit-down session. You see that. Now, the question is, in respect of the information Rydon was providing to the TMO, and indeed other parties on the Grenfell project, to what extent were you content with the quality of that information?
I believe the quality was fine. There may have been a lag with, and which is what Neil was raised with, when the client requested changes or there were changes to the contract, with us providing financial information quickly.
To your best of your recollection, did Claire Williams ever raise with you prior to this email a complaint that she wasn't getting quality information in a timely way?
Not that I remember, no.
If we look at ART 406696, please, we can see an email from Neil Reid to Chwichin Lim at Artelia, so it's internal, same day, 2nd of June 2015, in which he asks, and it's the second email down on page 1, third paragraph, he says, how are we to go to get price certainty? As it strikes me, it's not in Rydon's interest or priority to be diligent here. My question is, did Mr. Reid ever discuss that view that he's expressed there internally at Artelia with you?
I don't remember it, no.
Do you have any explanation yourself for why Mr. Reid might have formed that opinion of Rydon?
No.
Do you accept what he says, that it wasn't Rydon's priority to provide pricing information diligently?
Well, I would have thought it was in our interest, but I don't know what specifics they're talking about.
And the heading of the email is the notes on the commercial review meeting 27th of May 2015, which we discussed earlier. And that's the context of what he's saying. But can you help us with whether you accept that it wasn't Rydon's priority in that context to provide pricing information diligently, which is the impression Mr. Reid's clearly got?
I don't think I can help with that. I don't think I can assist him on that.
Right, another document, RYD 44349, 44349, page 2, middle of page 2, please. Email from you, 22nd of June 2015, to James Clifton, Zach Maynard, attaching Andy Hannibus's invoice for Stuart Hannibus Management Services. You see that?
Yes.
And it looks as if there had been a reduction, but he was still on the site. You see this first email on the top of page 2. Do you see that? And then if you look at the page, look at page 1, we can see Mr. Blake emails you in response, and only you. It's the bottom of that page. He says, the gift of timing, this is burning a hole in our pockets. Can we reduce this to once a month? Catch up. What did you understand, Mr. Blake, to mean by this is burning a hole in our pockets, Rydon's pockets?
I would suggest that was we were going over budget with Andy, not Andy Hannibus, Stuart Hannibus was a freelance M&E specialist that we brought in to help the management team, and I would surmise by that we've allowed a time period for him and a cost, and it's going over the budget allowed.
Right. And what did you... Well, we could see your response, in fact. Same day. Steve, not that I disagree with the fact Stuart is costing us money, so probably over budget. However, it disappoints me that Zach has sent this to you without talking to me. If I'd actually seen any budget for Grenfell in the last 8 months at least, then we may have been able to manage this differently. Now, that looks like a complaint to Mr. Blake from you. Had you actually seen no budget at all for Grenfell in the 8 months prior to June 2015?
I don't recall internally. I don't recall. I would suggest I've definitely hadn't seen them as frequently as I would have liked to or should have done.
On the face of it, you are telling him that you hadn't seen a budget for Grenfell in the last 8 months. So that would be from October 2014. Actually, about the time you signed the contract with the TMO. Is that right?
I don't recall it, but if that's what it says, then...
Well, it is, and you wrote it. So have you any reason sitting here now to think that that's wrong?
No.
Would that be in accordance with your experience of these kinds of refurbishment projects, that you would sign the contract and as contract manager or see no budget at all for a period as long as 8 months?
No, I wouldn't expect not to see the budget for 8 months. No.
So by this time, you hadn't seen a budget for Grenfell for 8 months. Did that not ring an alarm bell with you?
In what respect?
Well, the fact that you hadn't seen a budget in the last 8 months would have been a serious matter, wouldn't it? Because you wouldn't be able to keep tabs on the project and whether there were any cost overruns.
Well, I would expect that Zach and his team, again, bearing in mind we met weekly, again would raise anything by exception. So if there was any issues, then it would be raised.
But you were the contract manager on this project. How can you account for not seeing any budget at all for a period of 8 months?
I can't.
It's a pretty big lapse, isn't it? Because you would have no control at all about cost overruns or programming.
Sorry, cost overruns or programming?
Well, cost overruns. Let's stick with that.
Cost overruns, right? Okay.
But you would have no control of cost overruns, or indeed how the money was being spent on the project.
There is a team there still doing that. It's not as if it's receipts are just being put in a drawer and forgotten about. It's being managed by a managing surveyor of equal level and his team. So, but yes, it would be preferable to see the budget. Yes.
Preferable? You think it would be preferable? I'm
Yes.
going to suggest to you that it would be essential for any contract manager to keep absolute tabs on the budget on a regular basis throughout the life of a project, surely.
I don't think it would be absolutely essential, quite as you're suggesting, because we have other parts of the department that deal specifically with that element. So they would be reporting back to myself and Steve if there were any issues with that.
You say in your statement, and I don't need to take you back to it, at paragraph 14, that the contracts manager's role in Rydon, or for Rydon, is to oversee construction projects from inception to completion. Was it not essential in that role, in overseeing this construction project, to have your fingers on the budget?
It would definitely be preferable, yes, and it should have happened, yes.
Right. Now, you continue in this email. At the moment, we have a poorly performing site, which is mainly but not totally caused by poor surveying and cheap, incompetent subcontractors. Cheap, incompetent subcontractors. Who were they?
I think that's me just having a general vent, to be perfectly honest with you.
Right. Well, who were they?
Judging by the tone of the thing. I don't recall, I don't know.
Well, you must have meant somebody. You must have indicated to Mr. Blake somebody when referring to cheap, incompetent subcontractors.
I don't know. I've not named anybody in the email, so I...
No, it's why I'm asking you, you see.
Yeah, well, obviously, but I don't recall.
Don't recall. What gave you to think that your subcontractors, whoever they were cheap and incompetent?
I don't know, because I don't recall.
You say you don't recall. This was you having a vent.
Yes.
So you must have felt pretty worked up about it to be able to say things, even internally, this candid. I'm just wondering why it is you can't recall.
Probably because about 5 years ago, and I couldn't name you who at the time I obviously felt were cheap and incompetent. Mm.
When you say you have a poorly performing site, in which respects did you think at the time the site was performing poorly?
I think probably, as it says there, by the poor surveying. I think we were probably, and I'm guessing at this because I don't recall, it's probably to do with orders and getting subcontractors on site in a timely manner.
Given that your view at the time looking at this document was that you had poor surveying and cheap, incompetent subcontractors, can you tell us whether you took any steps as a result to ensure that the quality was improved so that your subcontractors and surveyors, however cheap, might have acted competently?
Obviously, I had a conversation with Steve and I'm sure with Zach as well.
Can I go to another email? Neil Reed, this time to Claire Williams, ART 406604. This is now 17th of August 2015. Halfway down that email, and to be fair to you, you're not copied in on this. It's between Artelia and their client, TMO. Claire, I've been to site today, so I'm up to speed with item 3. Simon Lawrence leaving in 12 weeks, with no indication of contingency planning. Just pausing there, and we'll come back to it actually when we see the next part. And then 3/4 of the way down, you can see it says 1, ongoing delays, what is being done to mitigate them, and when will Rydon finish? And then 2, continuity measures re Simon's departure, cognizant that his last day is 23rd of October, and there is now sufficient evidence to indicate that completion will not be achieved on this date. 3, resource levels. I think Simon needs help with what appears to be an overwhelming volume of work to manage in the coming weeks. Do you accept that by August 2015, Rydon was not committing sufficient resource to the Grenfell Tower project?
I don't know if the resource had changed. We'd have to look at the records. I don't recall if the resource had changed. Maybe people had left by then. There were several people that had left. So. And the team changed throughout, so maybe that's the reason.
It's not quite an answer to my question. I'll just press you a little. Do you accept that by this time, Rydon wasn't committing sufficient resource to this project?
Well, I don't know in what context and what resource we're talking about, because I don't think the site team or the team as a whole had particularly changed. So,
right. Well, if that's the case, are you able to explain why, again, Mr. Reed had the perception that he expresses here?
No, I think you have to ask Neil.
All right. Now he thinks and says that you are, or appear to be, in need of help because you are dealing with an overwhelming volume of work to manage in the coming weeks. Was he right about that? Were you dealing with an overwhelming volume of work?
Well, there's always a considerable amount of work to do. Yes.
Did you need help?
And I was
Sorry,
and I
I'm
was,
so sorry.
Sorry, and I was involved more from a hands-on point of view than probably you would expect a contracts manager. And obviously there was, I don't know at that stage, so that's August, whether there was something particular in a programme that was starting that needed additional resource. I don't recall.
Did you need help?
It would have always been welcome.
You say that you were involved more from a hands-on point of view than probably you would expect a contracts manager. Does that not rather suggest that you were actually under-resourced or short-handed, so that you were doing rather more work than you would ordinarily expect?
Possibly there was more being. I don't know. Possibly there was more from a client perspective that needed attention than would otherwise. I mean, it was a complex project, and there was a lot of change. So it may be from that point of view.
If you felt that you needed help to do the things that you otherwise wouldn't do, why didn't you go to the client and say, "Can I please have an extra pair of hands"?
Because I wouldn't go to them. I'd be going internally to that would be for Rydon to be dealing with.
Why didn't you do that?
Because I felt that I was obviously doing my best to cope with it. We're always under. There's no time we're sitting there twiddling our thumbs doing nothing. We're always under time pressure and volume of work.
Now, item 2, which I read to you, continuity measures re Simon's departure, cognizant that his last day is 23rd of October. Can you help us? Was there a system by which you handed over to your successor, given that you were going to be leaving on the 23rd of October?
Yeah, I had 3 months worth of notice, which I served. And in that time period, gradually Steve integrated into my role, taken over my role, and Dave Hughes was brought in as well.
Was there a handover process?
By the fact of, yes, there was, by the fact of Steve being on site, and I can't tell you how many days a week, but more days a week, and gradually taking over the workload. So yes.
Did you have a handover meeting with Steve Blake?
Not one specific meeting, but we had a meeting weekly from the start of this. We always had an update weekly for all the teams at our head office with Steve, so he was fully aware of the progress of the project from the very start. So he was very, he was already very aware and up to speed, but it was just a 3-month handover where he gradually got introduced into the project more.
What about David Hughes? Did you have a handover meeting with David Hughes?
David Hughes did the same, but he took over more of Simon O'Connor's role rather than mine. So Simon O'Connor, I think, had left by then or around that time.
Right. So the gist, I think, of what you're telling us is that there was no specific handover meeting between you and either of those Rydon executives, rather a process by which they gradually became more involved over the period of your notice.
Agreed.
Yes, I see.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to look at ART 406706, please? And I'd like you to look at the top email there from John White, 10th of May 2015. Now, that isn't right. It's actually an American dating. It's the 5th of October 2015 to Claire Williams. And we can tell that because the email to which it responds is dated the same day, 5th of October 2015. And he says there, "Hi, Claire. Tony is back from holiday now, and we have arranged to view 136 then. We will also view the other properties you stated, and we'll come back to you tomorrow. Is that okay? Just sent my report. Not good reading, I'm afraid. Simon from Rydon's needs to start handing over all the duties to his replacement ASAP, and Rydon's need to get the cladding contractor up to their labour immediately." Did anybody raise these concerns as reflected in this email with you?
Not that I recall, but John White would only be visiting site once a week, once every 2 weeks, so he wouldn't see what handover was happening or wasn't happening, to be fair.
Do you recall an issue on site with the cladding contractor being short-staffed or not having sufficient labour?
I think at that time, if the dates were any other way, I think that is the time where Harleys were transitioning from one company to another, so it would seem correct in what he's saying that there may well be a dip in performance or dip in progress whilst they're changing from one company to another.
And how did you deal with that, Mr. Lawrence?
I didn't particularly. It was with Steve at the time.
Right. Why is that?
Because I was leaving, so I was a couple of weeks away from leaving.
I see. So,
At that time, Steve was integrated, and Steve was picking up that transition from Harley Coat and Morley.
does that mean that as Mr. Blake was doing more, you were doing less?
Yes. Well, yes. Of the ongoing stuff, yes.
And was Mr. Blake specifically engaged in the issue of ensuring that the cladding contractor at this time had sufficient labour?
Yes, Steve would know all about the transition from one Harley company to another.
Can we look at ART 406672, please? This is an email 9th of May 2016. So this is after you left Grenfell, and you are, I think, unlikely to have seen this document, but I just want to flag it with you. He says in the second line, this is just to flag that this is becoming a farce. Despite all our efforts to ensure a smooth landing, I have to say I do not think I have ever worked with a contractor operating with this level of nonchalance. We are all getting sucked into doing far more than we ought to at this stage of the project. I'm wondering if you need to write to the TMO to express our concern and what we are endeavouring to do about it. Additional site visits, additional meetings, endless emails on design-related issues that don't concern us, as Claire is the design lead, etc., challenging the contractor, etc. Now, up to the point at which you left on the 23rd of October 2015, so some 8 months or so prior to this email, to be fair to you, is that a fair criticism of Rydon?
No, I don't think so.
Had Artelia or the TMO, either of them, ever accused you or Rydon generally, to your knowledge, of nonchalance?
No.
Can I ask you to go to RYD 3042091, please? Email 20th of May 2015. So, a year before, while you are on the project, and it's from you to Simon O'Connor and Danny Osgood, and you're forwarding to them an email exchange between yourself and David Brissenden, who we discussed, I think, a day or two ago. And you say in the second paragraph there, I've told him about our quality procedures which we should be carrying out. Whilst we always do this, we aren't always the greatest on site at keeping all of the records. In this case, we need to be spot on in case the funders require it at the end in order to release funds. See that? Is it fair to say that even you acknowledged that Rydon's quality control was lacking, at least in the respect you identify there?
I think that reads as keeping, as in long-term, the records, as opposed to not doing them.
And would it be fair to describe Rydon's attitude about record keeping on site, at the very least, as nonchalant?
No, I don't think that's fair.
Can I ask you some questions? Mr. Chairman, I'm 2 topics short of completion. They're short topics. It might be convenient to take a break now.
Well, we're going to have a break.
We're going to exactly.
Before long anyway.
We are.
And how long will it take you to finish your...
About 20 minutes, I would say. Now, I appreciate that's not
Well,
ideal. It's slightly longer than we
Yes.
at least told the witness.
Let me just ask you this, Mr. Lawrence. When Mr. Millett gets to the end of his questions, which he says will take 20 minutes. We shall have to have a break anyway, so that he can consider whether there's anything that's been left out, or perhaps to consider potential questions from other people who aren't in the room. At that point, we'll probably have to have at least 20-minute break. Would you feel comfortable going on for another 20 minutes and then having a longer break, or do you feel you'd like a break now?
I'm happy either way, whichever suits.
You sure?
Yes.
Well, in that case, Mr. Millett, I would think it'd be better if you got to the end of your questions, didn't you?
I do, yeah. I'm very happy to do that.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, I want to ask you about building control and, first of all, the topic of workshops. Now, Mr. Crawford told the inquiry, and I'm going to give some references. I'm going to tell you what he said, but if you want to see the transcripts, we will dig them out and put them up on the screen. But on day 11, at page 14, line 2, Mr. Crawford said that he said Weed, that's Studio E at the very least, had workshops on site with building control, and one of the things we discussed was the cavity barrier strategy. And then day 11, page 14, line 20, he says what would happen is you would have the design team meeting, then Rydon would bring in either Harley and or building control, and you would have a sort of workshop off the back of it, let's say. And then on day 11 at page 15, line 11, he said, also Rydon was having separate meetings with building control, so whether I ended up just sitting there in those, it's very difficult definitively to say when all of them were. Now, pausing just there, do you remember having workshops, as he described them, with building control, in which the design for Grenfell Tower was discussed?
I remember building control coming to site, yes, and sitting around a table to discuss plans, designs, etc. Yes.
Did you have these workshops, as Mr. Crawford describes them, without Studio E there at any time?
I don't recall Studio E not being there, but I could be stand corrected, but I don't recall that. But building control would obviously turn up to site or be invited to site to come and inspect the work. So unless Neil is referring to that, I don't know. I
see. Okay, and he referred to them as workshops. And were these pre-arranged brainstorming sessions where you would talk about problems, or were they inspection occasions?
The workshops that I believe he's referencing are where we would have the design team, and then building control would then join to discuss things like the fire barrier conversations we went through earlier.
Now, can you remember, I appreciate it's a long time ago, when the first of these so-called workshops happened?
Date-wise, no.
Roughly? Even a date range would be helpful.
Well, yeah, it'd be obviously after the application went in to building control, so the last quarter of 2014.
Right.
Maybe.
How regularly did they occur, do you remember?
With building control, I think it was as and when there was a specific topic to go through.
Were records taken of these so-called workshops or meetings?
I don't know. I can't remember.
Did you observe records being taken of them?
I don't recall.
Did you take any yourself?
I may have taken handwritten notes, but they're not available anymore, unfortunately.
Right. Mr. Crawford.
Sorry, can I just add to that? Generally, anything coming out of meetings like that, if there weren't actual minutes, generally they'll be clarified by email by one of the parties.
And do you remember who from building control attended?
It would be John Hoban, and I think Paul Hanson did as well.
Anybody from Harley, do you remember?
It would have been.
Who was that?
I'm guessing now it will be.
Well, don't guess. If you can't remember, you can't.
I was going to say, I couldn't tell you specific names now.
All right. Mr. Crawford said in some instances it was Ray and Ben. Those would be the Baileys, and sometimes Kevin.
That would sound.
Kevin Lamb.
Yeah, that would sound correct.
Did Rydon orchestrate those meetings? Was Rydon, and specifically you, the person who actually organised them?
I don't know if it was me or Studio E, or Harley's potentially. It could be any of the three parties.
To your understanding, were they arranged with building control as a way of resolving issues with the design of the cladding package?
If Harleys were involved, then yes, I would assume so.
Was there any discussion at these meetings about the materials that were being used on the building?
I would have thought so, but I'm assuming because I can't
remember.
recall what the...
And I was going to ask you specifically in respect of the materials to be used in the cladding system.
Again, I would assume so if it was a cladding specific meeting, but...
Do you remember whether any drawings were examined at those meetings?
Again, I would expect there to be, yes, but I couldn't say for definite, but I would expect there to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Mr. Crawford's recollection is that you, Mr. Lawrence, orchestrated those meetings. He's clear about that. Can you help? Is he right?
I think between all parties, if there was a, it would be flagged from Harleys and/or Studio E, probably Harleys if we're talking about cladding, that there was some advice needed from building control. Yeah, and it may well have been myself or Simon O'Connor that made a phone call or sent an email and arranged for them to be on site. We may have arranged them to be the same time as when there would be a inspection of the actual building works as well.
Can I ask you to look at Mr. Crawford's statement at SEA 3014275 at page 65? And I'd like to look with you, please, at paragraph 206 at the bottom of that page. Where he says in the first line, towards the start of my involvement in the project, I recall meeting John Hoban, Building Control, with Simon O'Connor, Rydon, on site. And he goes on to say, this may have been during the week commencing 25th of August 2014. I remember that John was very clear about how he wanted information issued, if you could just go over the page, such as that he was specifically, yes, that's right, such as that he was specifically and primarily concerned with fire-related matters and wanted a basic set of information so that he could then request further information if he required it, so that he was not overwhelmed with this information. Now, you're not referred to there as being present at the meeting, but do you remember the occasion of the meeting?
Not specifically.
Right. Mr. Crawford's recollection was that this was a formal introductory meeting, and that he specifically recalled sitting there and discussing the project with Mr. Hoban, and that Mr. Hoban inspected basic drawings and took them away. But he also said, and this for our note rather than your benefit is day 11, page 139, line 25, Simon Lawrence almost certainly would have been at the meeting. Do you remember that?
I would have expected to have been probably a majority of the meetings with building control, but quite often John was working on the project next door, as I think it shows on there, so would often, as he was in the area, pop into the site. So I didn't see John, I didn't show him round site when there was inspections. I may have seen him once or twice, but I wouldn't, because I wasn't on site all the time, I wouldn't necessarily be there at the same time he was. So,
do you remember attending a meeting with Mr. Hoban in late August 2014, at which Studio E provided Mr. Hoban with design drawings of Grenfell Tower, and Mr. Hoban took them away?
I don't remember that specific meeting.
Right.
But
Can
that's
I?
not to say I wasn't there.
Continuing with the topic of building control, had you ever worked with RBKC Building Control at any time prior to the Grenfell Tower project?
No.
Can I ask you to look at RYD 404218? This is an email from Steve Blake to you and Zach Maynard, 8th of May 2014. Can I ask you to look at the bottom? And it's about cladding. It's about the face-fix panels and the fact that the planners remain to be convinced about rivets. So that's where we are in that part of the story. We examined that a couple of days ago. But at the bottom of the email, Steve Blake says to you, P.S. Claire mentioned building control submission as the department is swamped. Use someone else. Did you respond to Steve Blake, do you think? I don't think we've been able to track down a response.
I don't recall that comment. I don't recall that email particularly, to be fair. But
Right. Do you remember having any discussions with Miss Williams on this topic at all?
no, I don't remember Claire mentioning it, no.
Did you consider appointing an independent building control inspector, an AI?
Not at Grenfell, no. And we generally, to be fair, and that's not to say we never did, but we generally, when you're working for a local authority, would appoint the local authority building control as well.
Do you know who made the decision as to which building control inspectors to use, so to speak?
No, I don't remember the specific decision. I think it was always assumed that RBKC building control would be used. Yeah.
Would it have been more expensive to use an approved inspector as opposed to using RBKC building control?
I don't know.
Did you look into it?
No.
Now, RYD 3016969, please. This is an email of the 2nd of September 2014 where Mr. Crawford emails you, and he says, Simon, Paul is a fire engineer and best placed to answer questions regarding the dry riser and AOVs. John Hoban won't be able to provide any answers on his own and tends to refer to Paul all the time, which can be frustrating when you want answers. From that email, do you remember whether you drew any conclusions about John Hoban's competence with respect to fire issues?
No, he just showed that he would default to his fire engineer. So,
from your experience of your work on Grenfell Tower, are you now in a position to agree with Neil Crawford's assessment of the relationship between John Hoban and Paul Hanson that he expressed here?
John would, and I think there are other emails that probably sets out which parts of the building Paul would look at, which parts of the building John would look at. But yeah, John would consult with Paul, or my belief is John would consult with Paul as the fire engineer on fire-related matters.
Now, when Rydon came on as a design and builder into the project, did you yourself take any steps to find out what contact Studio E already had within RBKC Building Control?
I recall the name John Allen, but I
Right.
can't remember quite what we did or didn't do.
Were you aware of any pre-full plans application submissions to Building Control?
No. I think there'd been some preliminary work with
Right.
building control, but
Were you aware that Studio E had not, by the middle of 2014, provided Building Control with any detailed information about the cladding design?
by the middle of 2014,
Yes.
because the cladding design wasn't completed by then.
So this is the answer to my question. You were aware that they hadn't provided any detailed information,
Correct.
even if it wasn't completed.
Correct.
Can I ask you to look at RYD 40125002? I just want to ask you about the full plans application. This is an email from Mr. Soanes to Mr. Allen of RBKC of the 17th of July 2014, to which you were copied. And if you look at, I think we may need the second page, actually.
This is from Mr. Crawford, I think.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's the one I want is on the second page, in
Oh,
fact.
right.
Yes. Now, this goes back to January 2014, and that's where it starts. But if you go to page 1, just want to look at the exchanges on the 17th of July. John Hoban writes to Neil Crawford, CC Paul Hanson, Neil, please find detailed below the last emails I have in my possession related to the Grenfell Tower project. And then Neil Crawford to John Hoban by way of response same day, copied to Mr. Sains and Mr. Lawrence. John, thank you for the correspondence. I understand from Bruce that the value of the project currently sits at £8.5 million. Following the submissions of an agreed fee schedule for the next phase, approved inspector stage of the project, I agree it would make sense to sit down at the earliest convenience to review where we're going forward. Neil. So it is a Crawford, not a Sains email. And you got that at the time. So you were aware, is this right? You were aware at the time that at this point it was important for the project architect and building control to look together at, as it were, where we are going forward?
Yes.
And then if you look at the next document, SEA 50175, this is an email of the 24th of July 2014. This time from Bruce Soanes to John Allen, copied to Neil Crawford and you. John, further to Neil Crawford's email a week ago in my earlier call, please could you get in touch to discuss building control fees for the above projects. We understand that the client's budget is £8.5 million. The application will be made by the design and build contractor Rydon, who are on site. Studio E's appointment has been novated to Rydon, and we will be leading on gaining approval. The fire strategy was a tricky subject, and we would like to engage on this as soon as possible. Now, by the time these emails had been sent, Rydon had been the design and build contractor, or they're not formally contracted yet. That didn't come till October, but for about 3 months. And I think it's right that you didn't sit down at this point with RBKC for a review of where we're going. Is that right?
Correct.
And if you go to the next document, SEA 301138, a little bit later in the month, July 2014, this one, 29th of July, SEA 301138. Yes, Bruce Soanes to Zach Maynard and you, copy to Neil Crawford. See note from building control on the fee, and then in the last paragraph he says he wants a set of drawings to accompany the submission, but it probably makes sense to hold on to the drawings till we have confirmation on the flats and ground floor changes. When you got this email, did you take this as a Studio E advising you not to submit drawings with the full plans application form, do you think?
I don't think we would have submitted the form. I think that would have actually been done by Studio E. I think all we did was probably provide the fee, the cheque.
All right. But did you take this nonetheless as advice that whoever was going to do the submission, the drawings were not going to be submitted with the full plans application form?
Yes, I probably did.
Did you agree with that advice?
I think at the time there was still quite a lot of change going on. You wouldn't want to confuse building control by issuing a set of plans that 2 weeks later on would be out of date.
Is it common, or was it common, in your experience, for full plans applications to be submitted without any drawings?
Is it common?
Yes.
I don't normally submit them, but I would have thought they would go with some drawings, whether it be full plans or not. But I think it would depend on what stage the design was at the time.
Can I ask you to look forward in time to ART 406722, please? These are the minutes of the meeting, of progress meeting number 2, 19th of August 2014. As you can see there, and this is a meeting at which I think you were not present, but received these minutes for information. And if we look at item 6.1 on page 3, please, we can see there that building control, SL to confirm when he has appointed the building control regulator through the council. Now, first of all, do you remember seeing these minutes?
Oh, I don't remember them specifically, but I'm sure I do.
Right. Now, by this stage, this is 19th of August 2014, the full plans application had been submitted. But do you remember whether Rydon had yet made direct contact with building control?
I don't recall, but there is an email of me introducing us to it.
Yeah.
to them. So,
Yeah, it appears that you were going to confirm when you had appointed the building control regulator through the council. So can we take it from that even though the full plans application form had not yet gone in, you hadn't actually made the appointment as indicated there?
I think all I would read into those minutes is that maybe, as I wasn't in attendance, Simon or whoever else didn't confirm that we'd already done that, whether they, didn't confirm they did that and were expecting me to confirm it.
Right. It's right. Is it right that at that stage, 19th of August, the plans had gone in, but you had not yet appointed the building control regulator?
The plans had gone into building control, but we'd not yet appointed them. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm asking you.
I'd have to look at the correspondence to know when the application form went in, when the cheque went in, etc. But I don't recall that time frame.
All right. 3rd of September 2014, RYD 3016990. You emailed John Hoban yourself to introduce yourself.
Yep.
You see that email. You say yes.
Well, I recall it.
You recall it?
We've looked at it
We have.
since.
We have. Morning, John. We haven't been introduced properly yet, but I'm Rydon's contracts manager for the Grenfell Tower project. That was the first contact I think you had with building control, wasn't it?
Yes, I believe so.
And you refer in that email, as you can see, to a meeting on site between John Hoban and Simon O'Connor.
Which presumably is the meeting that was referenced a few moments ago.
Yes, I was going to ask you that. Did Simon O'Connor himself relay to you what had been discussed at that meeting? I mean, I know Mr. Crawford recalls you being present and you can't remember, but did Mr. Connor tell you what was discussed at that meeting?
He may have done at the time, but I don't recall now.
Do you know whether Mr. Connor had said anything to Mr. Hoban about whether the cladding system complied with approved document B?
I don't recall being told that, and I can't imagine. I think it's probably best to ask Simon, but I can't imagine that Simon O'Connor would be stating that to building control.
And then you go on to say in the email, halfway down that first paragraph towards the right-hand side, to be honest, we would have liked to have got yourself on board earlier, but there has been some client design changes which we were hoping to confirm before our application so as not to confuse issues in the future. Now, I think you'd been saying internally that you were going to be getting building control on board from as early as June 2014. And can you explain the time lag?
Only by the fact that there was a lot of changes going on and exactly what I've said there. I'm not sure the reference to June, whether it said there was a date that it had to be done by, or whether it was a comment in June that we would get building control on board, which is exactly what happened. Once we knew what we were building, we didn't want to get building control on board before we actually knew what the scheme was going to be finally comprised of.
Yeah, I mean, by this stage, Studio E had submitted the full plans application, but no drawings or no detailed drawings.
Okay, because I would suggest we were still going through the design process of changing windows and looking at everything else relating to that.
Yes, and I'm just really trying to suggest to you that Rydon were quite slow in getting to talk to building control, and I want to know why that is.
I would disagree with that. I don't think that's any different in my experience to other contracts, and why would you want to bring somebody on board with information you know is going to change potentially a week or 2 weeks later and completely confuse things? It just makes sense to.
Work had started on site by this stage, hadn't it? Certainly the enabling works.
The enabling works may have done, yes.
Were you under pressure to submit the full plans application form, even though without the detailed drawings, because work had started on site?
I mean, we would be keen to be getting them on board as soon as possible. But again, we were waiting for the significant changes that were brought about before we engaged fully.
Now, SEA 3011707, please. This is 18th September 2014, when Neil Crawford emails you. And he attaches, well, I'll just wait for it to come up rather than galloping ahead. Neil Crawford, 18th of September 2014, to you, and he attaches some MOE, means of escape plans. And he says, Simon, not sure if you are aware of these building control preliminary observations that were made at the end of last year, attached. They raise a number of concerns in relation to additional doors, stroke specification, fire rating, stroke venting. They will also have ironmongery implications. Based on our experience at Calc, where the process dragged on over a long period, I'm keen to sit with John and Paul and go through these issues and clarify them all in order to eliminate risk. Was this the first time you were aware of pre-application discussions between Studio E and building control?
It may have been, I don't.
Were you surprised that Neil Crawford was sending these comments nearly 9 months after they'd been received?
To us.
Yes.
I don't recall my thoughts at the time, but yeah,
I mean,
don't really recall.
Studio E had been novated after you had been appointed in the March of 2014, and yet here was Mr. Crawford only sending you building controls preliminary observations made at the end of 2013, as late as the 18th of September 2014. Were you surprised by that?
You would expect them. I don't recall my thoughts at the time on this particular one, but you would expect them to be sent earlier. Unless they've been incorporated in the design. There have been comments that have been incorporated in the design, and the design was now up to date with the comments that have been mentioned previously.
Did you get the feeling that the building control process was some way behind where it should have been at this stage, given that at least the enabling works had started on site?
I think I'd probably refer to my previous answers about needing not to confuse building control and everybody else with a set of drawings that you know is going to be out of date.
RYD 3018742, please. 24th of September 2014. So about a week later, here we see Neil Crawford sending this is an email from Neil Crawford to John Hoban, copied to you. And here we see him sending a zip file of building control sets, and it's a series of fire strategy drawings. We looked at this earlier in your evidence. Did you agree with Studio E in advance which drawings would be sent to building control? Do you remember?
No.
Do you remember whether you checked these drawings at the time?
No, I would have been relying on Studio E.
Right. Were you aware at this time, and I think we looked at this earlier, but were you aware at this time that the drawing still had the cladding panels labelled as zinc, even though by this time ACM had been decided upon in principle?
No, I didn't notice it, no.
Were you aware that Studio E had not provided any details of the insulation that was to form part of the cladding in these drawings?
No.
Or that Studio E had not provided building control with the NBS specification?
No, I didn't notice that.
Right. Now, we know that in September 2014, in a document I'm not going to go to with you, RBKC Planning Department approved the change from zinc to ACM. Would you, as contracts manager at Rydon, have expected details of that change to be provided to building control itself?
I would expect the updated drawings to go to building control, yes.
Did you check to see whether they had been?
At that time, no. I don't believe we did. I think that was the process that we were we were carrying out as the design process, design development was going through its development process, because it wasn't all finalised at the start. You would expect them to update drawings and pass them on to building control as it progressed.
Right. Who had the principal liaison with building control? Would it be Rydon or would it be Studio E?
As far as design, it would be Studio E.
Right.
As far as site inspection, it would be Rydon.
I see. Are you aware of any register or tracker on the project that kept a record of which drawings were sent to building control?
I don't believe they were from Rydon, but I would expect Studio E to.
Right.
That would be in Studio E's remit.
Given what you've told us earlier in your evidence a number of times about Rydon's reliance on building control in relation to compliance with statutory requirements, can you explain why, given that reliance, there was no building control tracker established at Rydon so that you knew, or could tell, if you wanted to know, what drawings building control had been provided with?
That's I'm not sure Rydon. I've never seen a Rydon building control tracker. That's normally correspondence between building control and the architect, and both keep record of what they require and what they need to be sent. And quite often there's a file on site from building control that makes his comments and any queries relating to it.
So does it come to this, that even though Rydon was relying on building control to assist or advise it in relation to compliance matters, Rydon was reliant on others to keep a record of what drawings building control had at any given time?
Correct.
So in relying on building control, you weren't to know what drawings building control had or hadn't without going to other people first?
Correct.
I see. Just some questions about site visits. Were you present on site when...
It runs for half an hour, not 20 minutes. How much longer do you think you'll...
Indeed.
Not that I want to stop you. It's
No,
just that
I've got one short topic to cover. It really is. It's part of the same run of questions on site visits.
You right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yes, I appreciate I'm maybe testing everybody's patience with these. Do you ever remember discussing the cladding works with Mr. Hoban on site?
No.
So you don't have any recollection of discussing the materials that were to be used in the cladding system on this tower with Mr. Hoban?
No, I don't. I saw John, when it comes to site inspections, I saw John very rarely on site. It would be managed by Simon O'Connor and the team.
Can I ask you to look at RYD 30942213 at page 6? This is David Hughes' statement to the inquiry. He's going to be coming to give evidence, we expect, next week. Now, at page 6, at paragraph 26, he says that when he started on site, he says, I was informed by either Simon Lawrence or Jason North that the Clerk of Works and Building Control had been up the mast climbers to inspect the cladding on a number of occasions and were happy with the quality of the installation. Do you recall having a conversation with David Hughes to that effect?
I don't recall that specific conversation, but it would make sense that we'd, as part of the handover, we'd had that conversation.
Yeah.
Or one similar, yep.
How did you know that, if you did have that conversation, which you can't rule out, how did you know that Building Control was happy with the quality of the installation, as he records?
Because otherwise they would be recording comments with us, and they would... So site inspections, Building Control turns up, Building Control has a look at a section of work, and then they make comment either in a register or a folder that's kept on site, or via email to say if there's any areas of concern, snags, for a better word, and works that needs to be need some remedial works to be put right, and then they would then come back and inspect those works once they have been put right.
Did Mr. Hoban or anybody else from RBKC Building Control ever tell you yourself directly that they were happy with the cladding installation and its quality?
Me directly, no, because like I said, our paths might have crossed a couple of times, but I didn't show John around the site.
Very good. Mr. Lawrence, you'll be glad to know that I've come to the end of my questions for the time being, and I'm going to ask the chairman to take a short break to see whether other people from either behind me or core participants generally have follow-up questions for you. And so I can't let you quite go quite yet. I'm sorry, but can we take a break at this point, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, well, we'd better have a quarter of an hour, hadn't we?
Yes.
For all those
So
purposes.
I think so. Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Lawrence, I'm afraid it's not quite the end, but we're going to have a break now for the reasons which have been explained. We'll come back at 4 o'clock, please.
Thank you.
And remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence. Thank you very much.
Yes.
4 o'clock then, please.
emails piling in.
Right, would you like to ask Mr. Lawrence to come back, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Lawrence, home straight. You ready?
Let's go for it.
Good, thank you. Yes.
Right, Mr. Lawrence, just a couple of follow-up questions, first of all, on flat 136, the void. You remember the discussion about the door closer?
Yep.
Do you know whether there were any written records kept of something called toolbox talks, where damage to this door closer might have been recorded?
I would expect there to have been written records of toolbox talks, yes, but whether that was on there, I don't know.
Can I ask you to look at RYD 3049444, please? Which I think is the one we looked at earlier today, referring to Mr. Defan's complaint about the flat door of 136 being left open, the perco being broken. Now, we've not been able to find any response from you at all. Can you explain why there is no message or email in response to Ms. Williams's question to you or request to you?
No, it may have been verbal. I don't know.
It may have been verbal.
I don't know what response there was.
Right. Was there any agreement or arrangement by you or between you and the TMO whereby with complaints like this you would not put them in writing but would deal with them verbally?
There was no agreement. No.
Was there any understanding with the TMO that when it came to Mr. Defan particularly, complaints like this would be dealt otherwise than in writing?
No, there was no protocol for that at all.
All right. Can I ask you to be shown a document, different topic, a document which is TMO 00852038. Now, I asked you earlier on about whether TMO ever gave you any detailed information about whether the flats would be used by residents with things like mobility issues or impaired vision. You remember that discussion we had?
Yes.
And I also asked you some questions about whether Rydon had been given enough information about the profile of the residents occupying the building. You, I think, said that, and I'm summarising, that the only information that Rydon had was what the RLOs had, and that there were meetings between Rydon RLOs and TMO housing officers. So look, please, at this document. This is a minute or note of a housing management liaison meeting between Rydon and the TMO of the 14th of November 2014. And we can see who was present. Mr. O'Connor was present, and Maxine Igbenedian of Rydon, Siobhan Rumble and Claire Williams. And apologies from others. You weren't there, but I wonder whether you can help us with this. Item 2, well, first of all, did you ever read the minutes of these meetings, even though you may not have been present?
Probably not. It would probably, again, anything of concern would be raised by exception. So.
Right. Can you explain why Simon O'Connor, who was the site manager at this time, was present at these meetings and not you?
Simon O'Connor was project manager because he was dealing with the project on a day-to-day basis.
Project manager, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I follow. Item 2, residence profiling. And you can see what it said there, and there are some discussions about individual flats. It said MI, that's Maxine Igbenedian, said they had 107 surveys. The full spreadsheet needed to be okayed by Nikki before it can be passed to Siobhan. This includes info on residents deemed vulnerable. MI noted that flat 14 requested a shower, MI to get herself referred to RBKC OTs, and there's a phone number, MI noted that flat 166 had a shower and asked for a bath instead. SR to check tenancy basis. If new tenant or mutual exchange takes flat as seen. MI noted that there are 2 Notting Hill flats and they had asked for formal information regarding the works. MI to pass the details to CW. SOC noted that flat 135 reported a broken window, historic, Rydon swap broken for one void on flat 145. I've read that to you in full. Question, were you aware that a Rydon resident profiling exercise was an agenda item for these kinds of meetings?
I don't think I was aware.
Right. Were you aware that any kind of exercise included a collation by Rydon of information on individual residents deemed to be vulnerable?
I think, and again, possibly best to ask Simon and or the RLOs if you're speaking to them. But we would go round or they would go round and meet all the residents to get contact details and to get any, any circumstances that might be relevant to the works, or they may need assistance. We'd offer assistance moving items. If somebody couldn't move items, we'd offer assistance if there was a decamp flat that was prepared so they could move out during the works during the day. So that would be the purpose of the RLOs going around speaking to the residents, getting their information. And obviously, if there was any, quite often residents, I would suggest, spoke to the RLOs about more stuff than was anything to do with us, and we'd pass it back to the housing office if they didn't already know.
Did you know that a full spreadsheet was being compiled by Rydon, specifically Maxine Igbenedian and also Nikki Donnelly, which would then be passed to Siobhan Rumble at the TMO?
I probably did know. I mean, it's an RLO process managed by the RLOs, but thinking about it, I probably did know.
Right. Was it your understanding that the TMO was expecting Rydon, looking at this document at the least, to have relevant information about vulnerable residents in the tower that it might need in order to make decisions about matters on the project and the design?
Sorry, could you say it again? Sorry, I'm losing the a little bit.
Yes, I will.
Sorry, apologies.
Let me put the question a slightly different way so it's simpler. Did you understand at the time that TMO expected Rydon to have a full dossier of information about individual residents so that the refurbishment could be planned?
Yes, there is information that we needed to be able to contact residents.
Yeah, exactly.
And know the circumstances, yes.
And specifically relevant information about vulnerable residents?
Those items would be picked up, provided if the resident was obviously willing to share that information. Yeah.
Now, can I ask you to look at a different topic? I want to ask you about CDM regulations. Can you please go to ART 406174, page 2? This is an email chain between Rydon, Artelia and the TMO. And on page 2, we can see it comes from Claire Williams, 25th of September 2015, so a month or so before you leave. Simon, can I ask if Rydon would be able to take on the role of principal designer for Grenfell, or whether you would look to contract this out to Studio E? Can you please consider this request urgently, as I understand that the role changes from 5th of October. Artelia are preparing a handover pack as their professional indemnity won't allow them to take on this changed role. And if we scroll up to the response, page 1, your response, we can see that you say, sorry, it's not you, but it's Steve Blake to Simon Lawrence and Claire Williams. So you, Rydon, say, but you see this. Claire, as discussed at site meeting, unfortunately, this is not a role we are able to fulfill. On all our other contracts, the CDMC provider has transferred to become principal designer. What did you mean when you told her that I'm so sorry. Was it your understanding that that was a role that Rydon could not fulfil?
Correct.
And if you look a little bit down the page, and I should have shown you this document first, Mr. Lawrence, it's my fault. Simon Lawrence to Claire Williams, 25th of September 2015. Claire, I know Studio E aren't set up to provide this service at the moment. I'll refer to Steve regarding us taking this role, as I'm not sure whether we are set up for this yet. When you say not set up, what did you have in mind? What did you
Having the in-house expertise to be able to fulfil that role.
Is that why Rydon declined to take on the role of principal designer?
Yeah, I believe we spoke to Studio E, who again, at that time, the transition period of changing over to the 2015 regs, Studio E weren't able to provide that role either, and neither were Rydon.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Lawrence, I have one final question, which it tends to be one asked of major witnesses in this inquiry, and it's this. We've been through your evidence now for some 4 days, and I've asked you a lot of questions, and I'm grateful to you for answering them for us. Looking back on everything and looking back on the project as a whole, is there anything now that you'd like to tell us that you think now you should have done differently?
I think in hindsight, I think it would be good to employ, whether directly or indirectly, some more technical and, as in design, ability to check the design over and above the designers that we already had. So that's one thing. Yeah, sorry, a little bit weary after 4 days. So,
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Lawrence, thank you very much indeed. I have no further questions for you for Module 1, so I'm very grateful to you. Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Lawrence, thank you very much for coming to give your evidence. It's gone on for rather longer than I know you were expecting, but it has been very helpful to us to hear what you have to say.
thank you.
And we're grateful to you for making the additional time available. So thank you very much indeed, and you're now free to go.
Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Millett. That's it for today, I take it.
Mr. Chairman, yes, thank you. Can I thank you on behalf of my team for allowing us to sit a little bit later in order to finish this witness?
Right, it was very important that we got his evidence through today, and we'll take the next. It's at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. 10 o'clock tomorrow.